Hello everyone, welcome to our part 3 of the series on neurophysiotherapy approaches. In this discussion series, we have been discussing about neurophysiotherapy approaches, and in the last week, we discussed about conceptual and theoretical assumptions underlying the approaches. In this final part, we are going to discuss about how these approaches have evolved over time. And more importantly, we're going to address the question, are these approaches still relevant today? Again, I welcome Mr. Hariom to join me. Yes, this is the last series, so we are going to, we needed to give, I believe, sort of final answer to many questions on neurophysiotherapy approaches.
Right.
Before getting into relevance of these approaches in today's context, I wanted to go back to where we stopped in the last discussion. That is about how how these approaches, on that point of time, that these
Mhm.
approaches have looked at uh, patient problem from a slightly narrower perspective. And we also discussed about how from they were mostly reductionist and targeting impairments and expecting that changing the impairments, especially specifically some impairments such as muscle tone, changing these impairments will eventually lead to functional improvements in patients. So to moving on, I think from the time between 1950s and up to early 80s, these approaches were very popular in the field of neurophysiotherapy. There's a lot of courses were being conducted, and everybody was wanting to learn this in order to become an expert in neurophysiotherapy. Right. So, what are your thoughts on how these therapies evolved during this period of 1950s to nearly up to early 1980s?
Sorry, in what context are you asking?
I'm asking in terms of the interests that are developed about these approaches, and I'm asking if you could briefly describe, because you also was educated, I believe, in the late 1980s, right? So, what was the? Can you give us the context in that time in terms of uh, popularity of these approaches?
Actually, if you take in India, the popularity was actually sort of lesser.
Mhm.
Um, I think few people have studied PNF at that point, and some of them have studied robot, I suppose, but it was not taught extensively. But if you look into the cash textbook, what we read today still, uh, it is basically written from the Bobat's perspective. That's what it is, but it's like it's torn in a million pieces, so it's not very clear. So what the idea was, this is what I think, was we were trying to bring back to normal, if you will. We were curing the patient. We were trying to cure, if at all. Uh, but at the same time, we had a dichotomy that the nervous system does not go back to its original state, but we still try to cure it. Because when we went, not just when I went to college, most of the time, if you see the the objective of physiotherapy seems to be correcting this and that, making it normal, rather than thinking anything from the patient's point of view. So I think the predominant view was we were trying to normalize things. That was the major nomenclature which was used, I think.
Um, just one correction. I believe you went to college in 1990s. Otherwise, people
90s.
start
Yeah.
thinking you're too old than what you're here. Right. So, I've, I've, I went to physiotherapy in the late 1990s. At that time, what was being perceived is that the approaches are somewhat something equal to neurophysiotherapy. So what is neurophysiotherapy is about that you need to learn these approaches. This is approaches are neurophysiotherapy. That is what it is viewed. That's one of the it was either made to look like that, but and also at that time there is at least uh, when it comes to academia or in clinical practice, even up to the late 1990s, the research that is done within the neurophysiotherapy was relatively very less. But what I meant by research is that we didn't have concrete information that is coming out of research. I mean, the work has started, I believe, from 1970s and so on, but it didn't really reach up to the clinical practice. So what I have, when I was first introduced as far as research finding is that when I read Carr and Shepard, I think it's the neurological rehabilitation book, that blue book, is the first book in which,
Optimize
yeah, optimizing motor performance. And things,
what
right? So in that book is the first time I have ever read, as far as physiotherapy is concerned, that a particular view has been contradicted, because until then I have never read a textbook where information is provided as a fact. But that is the first book in which that they have stated that this is how it is viewed, but it is not so, by stating some of the research findings. Mostly, I think they have been citing from basic sciences, and
Yeah.
also quite a few work from motor learning that comes from athletic population and so on. So how do you see the contribution of that book for this evolution of neurophysiotherapy from the era of approach based to integrating research findings into our knowledge base?
I think that's our first baby step in terms of incorporating uh, information from three or four faculties, different areas of science. As you have pointed out, neuro, probably some amount of motor behavior, some amount of
Yeah.
motor learning,
Mechanics.
some amount of mechanics, right? Neurophysiology was also incorporated. Now, as you have pointed out, when we learned motor learning program in our college in 1994, I think, 3 or 4, I'm not sure. That was the first time we also heard that spasticity does not matter. Until that time, even in my undergraduate, I studied 6 stages of recovery. It was not
Yeah.
3 stages because we were not taught uh, Bobat's idea at that point of time. But here comes these people and they say that this plasticity does not matter and things like that. Now, was it easy to overcome in the individual level as well as a community as such? I think there was a lot of skepticism because they were saying that a lot of things they were contradicting the earlier findings from how to make them stand, what are the impairment level issues, say for example about spasticity or weakness and things like that, as well as to a certain extent in terms of what was the goal of the therapy as such. The goal slightly moved it. It didn't move again from to normalizing. It didn't move much from normalizing, but it moved substantially into making them walk, making them sit and stand and things like that.
Right. I still remember, I don't know if I've understood well at that time, but when I first read that in Carl Shepard book, I think in Motor Learning book, in the earlier chapters, they have made a statement, a very, I don't think that statement is even, emphasized as much as it requires. They made appear like a passing statement, said that movement should be viewed within the social milieu
Yeah.
of the patient. And while their treatment at that time, what they have developed, did not fully embolden that idea, but as you have said, it's a baby step in a sense that that's an important beginning of what
Yeah.
they have thought, that it should be seen within the context in which patient lives, rather than looking at as just as the patterns of movement which has been seen before that time.
And also, I just want to add, I had to go and look it up what it means social milieu, and it took me some time to understand what is social milieu because there was no Google at that time. So it took me some time to understand what is social milieu, and I think their biggest contribution of all, I think, bringing that ideas of context and social milieu into physiotherapy, especially in neurophysiotherapy. And also, it's just as sort of side note, when we had motor relearning program, as uh, as in the book, as you have correctly pointed out, even though they have said about the social milieu and things like that, it it's not fully into that book. It's
Yeah.
not complete. Their idea was not complete at that particular point of time. I asked the people who taught me, Mr. Ramesh and Raghu Aravind, who are in US now. Okay, how do we make people from sitting from the floor and things like that? Because that's the social milieu here.
Right.
So even though the book may not have gone to the fullest extent, but at least it opened the door for other people to look into it.
Yeah. So to those who are not familiar, motor learning program is arguably the last approach, if we can say, developed in neurophysiotherapy. And it is also one of the few, the only other one is PNF, that did not come with the name of the person who has developed it. Uh, so that sort of, I believe, it's shown that the newer path that they were wanting to take. They wanted to emphasize learning aspect, or the motor learning aspect of it. Even though if you look back now, we can't really say that motor learning was, as it is understood now, was integrated into the steps that they have suggested. But I also think that this particular approach, if we want to call, is grossly different from the other approaches, whereas the previous approaches started from a clinical observation, that what they have seen, and then they've started looking for explanations in the existing understanding of motor control. But motor learning program, they started off learning theories of how people learn, from theories, and then they've used that theory like acting as a spectacle. Then they viewed from that theoretical viewpoint, and this, in my view, this signals the scientific approach, introduction of scientific approach into neurophysiotherapy, where you have a theory and use that theory to look at problems, to explain that problem. And later part, some of what they have seen has been in experiments, it was found to be not appropriate, but that is the first beginning of introduction of scientific approach into how neurophysiotherapy is evolved.
Uh, Also, there was sort of a serendipity, if you will, when motor relearning started coming up. Step two happened at the same time. The ideas of evidence-based physiotherapy started, evidence-based medicine, but evidence-based physiotherapy also started. So all these things started coming together, and I think that's one of the reasons why it had a bigger and a better impact on changing how we look at neurophysiotherapy at this point of time.
Since you mentioned step two, again, for those who are not familiar with the history of neurophysiotherapy, step two conference, in my view, is a significant milestone in neurophysiotherapy. Step two conferences happens every 10 years, and the second conference, which is happened in 1990, is in which the overall purpose of that conference is to bring together, they wanted to look at all the teachings of various proponents, including Bobad, Brainstorm, Roots, and all of. They wanted to bring that and connect it with the science of motor behavior, motor control, and so on, and which has produced still today one of the classic text on motor control, motor development, and motor learning, and how its relevance to neurophysiotherapy, especially from a clinician point of view. So, what can you share about step two conferences and it, it how it has contributed to your understanding?
Right. We didn't have a slightest clue that there was a step two conference.
Obviously.
Right. So we didn't attend or anything like that. But in the mid of 90s, there was a series of articles in APTA, the PTJ journal, where they had ideas which was talked about in step two conference was sort of published, but I read it in the late 90s. So in this, you read about different theories of learning motor control. Some of the theories which we have studied is sort of it's been junk for newer ideas and better ideas. But there were a substantial amount of things to read, and that form the basis for what we think now is neurorehabilitation. One of the classical ideas is being task specific. Task specific started in that era, and it started getting better and better. People started using that word more. The context was talked about better, because at that time we started understanding that movements are context specific and things like that, which was already known in the motor control scientists and things like that. But it didn't come to the clinician. So I think that was a bridge between those two things.
And I also think I think that's the time where there is experts from the other fields, like motor learning and motor control, especially and Gentile, and how her influence. We should have a separate discussion on, because the more I have read about what she has said. Now this is in 1970s. It is still something that holds its value.
It's still not implemented in the first place.
It is. It is. So to think that in 1970s, from a motor learning literature, what is understood, to bridge that, and the whole idea of a conference is to bridge that gap between basic sciences from motor control and motor learning and bring it to the clinical practice. ideally how conferences should be, the purposes of the conferences, how it should be, and it takes place in every 10 years. So moving on, and I also think that is the period what I would like to term it as the beginning of the end of all these approaches, because after that we started have lot of assumptions and dogmas, if I may say, that you should not do a strengthening exercise when the patient is having spasticity, or you should not make the patient walk in the early stage because it will make spasticity worse, or it will make movement pattern become worse. And there's quite a lot of clinical dogmas that is derived from these approaches have been questioned, have been tested by conducting research, and research has consistently shown that these assumptions were wrong, which has led to waning of popularity of these approaches, and which has also led to some interesting developments where the approaches have started to shed their skin and try to wear a newer skin, and then again say that we have evolved and so on. So how do you see the approaches, or the named approaches specifically, coming to an end? And did it really came to an end, or how do you see that?
Uh, I don't see it as a coming to an end. I see it as uh, uh, we say in Tamil, Palayana Kalidarum, Puduvana Pudalum. That is, the old gets older and the new gets newer, or the newer thing comes upon. So one of the things which was the nail in the coffin for dogmatic schools, whether it is MRP or Bobat or anything which was dogmatic, was clinical evidence, right? When you start to ask people about clinical evidence, does it work on patients? Tell me where is the data and things like that. I think that is the end of the road for any dogmatic science. You have to show data. So I think, as I told you, the coming of age of the motor learning program and understanding from the basic science, and along came the clinical evidence, which was wanted in case of EVM. That that sort of put it all these things to rest, that you have to show the data. But as you know, from the hydrochlorine for COVID to all sorts of newer uh, treatment for COVID, even though it is shown to not work, uh, it doesn't get out of our system that easily. But it is, I think the fashion is slightly gone away, like the bell bottoms of the 70s. I mean, they just gone away. But there is still some fascination with that. But I think the nail is dogma cannot stick on because we are a science. That's what made us better.
Yeah. So to talk a little bit more about the cult-like following of an approach and use it as use it for making decisions about patient care. Uh, this was because the whole idea of science is to look at things objectively from the point of whether it solves a particular problem or not. uh, Unfortunately, when that movement has started, when people have subjected these assumptions to scientific inquiry, the response from the community, physiotherapy community, was not very, what should I say, encouraging. They were, received with severe criticisms of that. Now, that's also what the cognitive dissonance is there. As soon as
Mhm.
evidence start emerging that our long held convictions are not true, it was received with very strong and personal opposition. And one of the common counter argument, if I may say so, is that to say that randomized controlled trial cannot be conducted for testing these approaches, because when we started getting RCTs, and RCT shows that this approach, because we have been living with this imagination that this is a great approach, this is a good approach, and so on. The first question in the RCTs they have addressed is these approaches are superior? If the viewers have seen our first video, we also asked why so many approaches are there. So when too many approaches, what do clinicians do? That four approaches are there, I would select something that is better. So the question of superiority has been asked by conducting randomized controlled trial, and the results have consistently shown that these approaches are not superior. So the response for this results are to say that randomized controlled trials cannot really tell us, because these approaches are all very not conducive for a randomized control trial, because there is lots of tailor making of interventions which cannot be controlled in a RCT. So what's your take on this?
There are, first, we look into the cult part of one of the problems with dogmatic teaching. That is, this is how it has to be done. This is how you have to stand. This is where you have to keep your hand. If you keep it slightly away, then something will happen. That kind of dogmatic teaching produces what they call as in if you that's good in chefs. If you're a chef and you're able to produce what your the main chef produces again and again and again 50 times, 100 times, that's good in being a cook or something like that. But in science, it is not about doing the exactly what the other guy is doing. It is following the exact principles of science behind it and things like that. But sadly, as you had or I had, our exercise therapy teaching, if you see, it is about where to hold, how to stand, and things like that, rather than any principle. We are the only science where we don't have exercise therapy principle, but we study exercise therapy.
And we
So,
have this cleverly named terminology, that is key points of control.
right, which is you just hold the patient. What else can you do? There is no. It's it's not a TV where you do this and your TV gets better. Uh, this is for people in the 80s, not now.
Just to interrupt there, is that I just wanted to make one point. Is when people say that if you do it this way, this will happen. It's what is important is try not doing it and then still see if it's happening. Now, that is what an RCT does it. Most of us will do it and we see that it's happening. But what we fail to do is just don't do it and see if it's still happening. If it's still happening,
Right.
that's just a coincidence. And that is the fundamental aspects of an RCT. Ask that question, okay, what if I don't do it? What is often referred to as counterfactual. You have to think that if I'm not doing it, would it still happen, right? So that is the
That
RCT's fundamental point, why an RCT is valued higher than any other design.
that's a wonderful point. Now, when you, I'll add that I'll add note that more to it. When you see people, right? That is, you don't have to do an RCT. You just
Yeah.
uh, uh, do it in your clinic, and after 1 month, your patient is not improved. This is where a lot of people get stuck, right?
Yeah.
What we all think is, I didn't give it in a proper manner, what we call as the no true Scottman's fallacy, right? This happens for yoga also. When I put a post saying, about anything, people will be like, no, no, he's not a yoga guru. This is not true yoga. That is not how it works, right? So we ourselves are not inquiring ourselves, saying that did why didn't this guy get better? Is it because the treatment is not working, or I didn't follow the principles and things like that? And this is where the problem comes. There is no principle. You just told to where to hold and where not to hold, how to keep it all in alignment. You are not told why. What will happen if it is not kept? Will the nervous system think that no, 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 I will not work now? So this is the biggest problem. And the cult started because we didn't, we, I mean, by the people who study, did not understand science. So we followed dogma, and somebody is telling that your dogma is wrong. Uh, Becoming defensive is the right way to react. That is that's how a human has to react. But that's not right. But that's how we react. So that's where you get, I think, is the cult and the tribalism has happened. Uh, I think that stifled our thinking. It still stifles
Yeah,
our
yeah.
thinking. It still stifles our evolution. It still stifles everything. Uh, so that is the major point I want to talk about when it is about why it has been holden as a dogma. And also, remember for the other part of it, some people might also have recovered from what you have done, and that gets stuck in your mind, and you think that this guy is an idiot. I have seen it in with my own eyes, kind of bias comes in, and sadly it doesn't go away. So even if you show them an RCT, this is what I learned. It took me a lot of time to understand that also. Nobody changes their mind by facts.
Yeah.
If you see data or facts, nobody changes their mind. Uh, very, very few people do. Changing your mind is a far more complex idea. It took me long, long, long. I was an idiot, so it took me long time to understand that. Nobody sees the data and say, "Oh my God, I was wrong." Nobody goes like that. So that's the problem I think we had with the RCTs.
Uh, uh, Here, one problem I find when clinicians get offended that when you're shown research is that the research doesn't equal my experience or whatever one can think of. And they start identifying problems in research without having any understanding of it. And again, invent nonsensical terms such as practice-based evidence. It's an oxymoron to say that a practice
Yep.
based and evidence. So what I want to suggest for people who wants to listen is that randomized control trial, if you look at technically, if I may say, there is just so many things into it, right? It often takes couple of years of uh, uh, focused reading to understand why randomized control trials are considered very good or high levels of evidence. So if you are a clinician and you don't know RCT, don't try to interpret it because I mean you don't know. But what you can do is you can ask a simple question. Okay, if a treatment is found to be not effective, how was it determined? What was the outcome that was measured? What happened to both groups? That's the level of question that you could ask. You are about,
I also add one more thing.
yeah,
Nowadays, I ask this to a lot of people. If I tell them an argument and they keep on coming back with
yeah,
sort of, they will change the goalpost every year. So I start in the beginning itself. What will change your mind?
yeah,
Tell me, if you see this, it will change your mind. If they say that no, it doesn't, because I had an argument with one guy and he kept on saying that Siddha is this and that. I kept on saying that is all right. There are five Siddha doctors, and five Siddha doctors will not come to the same conclusion. They will
Yeah.
all have a different diagnosis. They will have a different treatment, right? Most of the time. Sometimes they may agree upon it. So I said, okay, now how will we determine which guys is the best? Right? They all have a different view. And I said,
Yeah.
okay, now how will I know that, okay, this is the best Siddha guy, so I have to follow this. He said that it doesn't work like that. I said, there is no more argument here. So if you think that there are five methods of doing low back pain, you have to ask yourself, what is the best? Then, if it is the best, will I change the mind? What will change my mind? That is a very important question we need to ask. And more to it, I think 2 years of RCT is not sufficient. Probably 5, 10 years of reading RCT to understand what's an RCT. That's all I think. At least that's what it took me 5 years to read. I still have a half and half understanding. So.
Yeah. And I don't. I think Sackett and others, guide, they wrote an entire book on clinical trials. I still have to read before I go and talk about uh, RCTs. Meaning there is just so many, and it is a what we call basics book about randomized control trials. To add some more points into common criticisms or people get offended is that first, when evidence shows that a certain approach is not working, right? And the first thing is that I have seen a patient getting better, or I have experience of 10 years, and people start arguing, or my teacher who taught me had another 10 years of experience. And so when people make this argument, what they don't understand is they're missing the whole logic behind. Because if you start arguing for or determining effectiveness based upon the amount of experience that person has had, so where will it end? That let us say if you are having 5 years of experience and you are saying some treatment is more effective, and I have 10 years of experience, I say that is no. So I win that argument. Or if somebody comes up with 15 years, it's and I have 15 years, whatever I say true. So this will take nowhere. And entering into an argument saying it doesn't, and a lot of people misunderstand that it doesn't devalue experience. Now, what experience can tell us, I think, is that now I am just been about almost 15 years since I started seeing patients. What experience tells me is that I can come to quick decisions, whereas earlier it might take even few weeks for me to come to that point. Now I can come to a quick decision. That's what experience has taught me. And I'm also, there is certain amount of maturity as a clinician that I have gathered, that there are certain problems may not be solved. We have to look for alternate ways of how better you can live with problems. This is what experience can tell. And also I think I've become better at communicating to patients
Yeah,
in
I
terms
think
of,
that is the important point.
yeah,
You get better in communicating. That is, you get better in interviewing, the so-called history taking and things like
the,
that. Please go on.
which makes one an expert clinician, not just in terms of producing a particular outcome that is also is there, right? So we needed to, as a group of professionals, we have to develop our identity based upon the scientific temper that we have, and also based upon evidence showing that we really contribute to patients' improvement and patients' betterment. Otherwise, if we are entering into argument that ours is the oldest one and so on, there is always somebody who can trump that argument. Would say 1,000 years before somebody else was there, 2,000, and you don't have any document to say 2,000 years before. You can say anything in 2,000 because you have advantage of not showing a document. But what is it? Where does it take us today? From here, where we are going to go. So for that, having a scientific uh, basis for our argument is the only future for us. And these approaches are all what I can say, or the this is how we evolved. Right? It's just like learning anything. If you're learning cycle, we fall down, or we have some very rudimentary ideas of what it is, and then we try that, didn't work, and then we slowly get better and better in doing that. I see these approaches are such an attempt to get better at what they are. But as you have learned, then we have to get with whatever that is working more, rather than thinking that no, I used to now ride bicycle with a crooked back, so that is, I still want to do that. No, that's not the kind of argument that we should be getting in.
So we will. I think we have digressed into EBM rather than into
Yeah, yeah.
approaches. So, uh, so we coming to the approaches. I just want to add to the idea that uh, I think we should not have approaches or school of thoughts and things like that in medicine. It doesn't augment well for science. Um, if it is science, the answer should be nearly one. Uh, the answer should be the same, nearly the same at least, with some amount of variation. I think that is where we will move from here to sort of higher level as a major science in healthcare providing.
Yeah. So the last question theme, I would rather say, is that uh, if someone here currently practicing therapist or a student thinks of, what is the best approach uh, to that we can choose, what would be your answer to it?
As I told you, there is no best approach. There is only best choice of treatment, which has been which has been backed up by some amount of data. Right. So that's how we have to look into it. Nobody asks anyone what is the best treatment for COVID, and you don't come up with four answers. You have to have one or two answers. So we have to have sufficient data to support a particular way of looking at the patient and follow that. And this is dated for today. So until today, the treatment is being more and more task specific, which may not change in my lifetime. At least that's what I predict. So that is the basic sense of it. And more importantly, I think we have to look approaches as its uh, basic features, not as jargons and pseudoscience nomenclature.
Yeah. So the conclusion that we can come to is that the approaches today is no longer relevant. That is named approaches. They are not relevant because they are not producing outcome that what we attributed to it. And in many cases, it can actually, if we are strictly adhering to a certain approaches, it can actually be harmful to patients' recovery, especially in the early stage, because most of the approaches do not recommend active forms of treatment during early stages. So approaches are not relevant anymore. And this is not a personal view. This is what the facts, accumulated facts. It's not some one study. And to give some context today, some countries have made strides to move forward. Say, for example, Nordic countries such as Netherlands have moved forward. They have a policy decision in stroke rehabilitation that they have retrained all their physiotherapists who are previously practicing Bobat. Now, as part of the government policy, they have retrained their therapists to learn task-based treatment and deliver it as a policy. And there are several other national guidelines, clinical practice guidelines for stroke rehabilitation that recommends task-oriented training. Say, for example, if you look at Australia or if you look at Canada, and even in UK, even though it's Bobat is still popular, but their national guideline doesn't specifically recommend Bobat. So that what I was trying to point out is people have moved on, and the sooner we catch up, then we would be moving towards a better high value care in stroke rehabilitation on par with developed countries which has better healthcare facilities.
Yeah.
Right.
Not just in stroke, in any condition.
Yeah. So this would be the end of this three-part discussion series. I do not know how many of you would consider this as a happy ending, but I mean, for our patients, this could really be a,
Yeah, exactly.
a happy recovery point they can get to. That's what we know. So if you're a student listening to this, you should learn approaches, no question about it. We should know what was there, but as a historical fact, how it evolved, but practicing is not recommended. Uh, in today's context, it is you can you need if you're thinking of how well I contribute, make my patient better, we should be thinking of contemporary approaches, which is functional and task oriented exercises, rather than and any form of the current approach is not requires you to critically evaluate existing evidence and then practice, rather than the conventional practice of following a particular guru or a cult and do as they say. Now it requires us to evaluate evidence and then integrate your patient values and implement it. So that's the end of it, and we are interested to know what you think. So if you have time, put it in comments, and we will be coming up with more such discussion series. So keep tuned, and again, subscribe to our channel. Right? Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.